The moon was broken into pieces, and the stars above were covered in thick smoke from old battles, as two alien warships floated in silence over the cracked surface below, where peace talks were supposed to happen between two powerful alien empires, who had hated each other for hundreds of years, and now had only one chance to stop a new war that could destroy 10 systems in a single day. The hall was cold and wide with sharp metal walls and red lights blinking along the floor, while guards from both sides stood ready with weapons in hand and cold eyes, watching every movement, waiting for any reason to start the fight they all expected to come. Then the humans arrived, but not in a ship of war, not with soldiers or weapons, but just a small, quiet shuttle that landed soft like a feather on the edge of the landing bay, and out stepped Ambassador Elena Voss, dressed in silver robes, and calm as ever, walking with her head high, like she belonged to a room full of monsters and generals and killers, who did not want peace, but only power. Behind her walked one man, tall and silent, wearing a long black coat, with no rank, no name, no medals, nothing at all that showed who he was, or why he was here. And when the alien guards laughed and asked where her army was, Elena only said, "This is all I need." The alien leaders looked confused, and some laughed more, thinking it was a joke or maybe a trick, because this man did not look special. His face was rough and marked with old scars, his eyes were gray like stone, and he did not speak or even glance around. He just followed Elena like a shadow with no life of its own. They entered the main hall, where the leaders of both alien sides waited at a large table with maps and screens, showing fleets ready to strike at a single word, and they welcomed her with fake smiles and cold greetings, while their guards closed in from all sides, slowly, too slowly, like they did not want anyone to notice what was about to happen. The room smelled of oil and metal and lies as Elena took her seat and began to speak of peace and future and hope, while Cole, the man in black, stood behind her, with hands behind his back and eyes scanning every inch of the room, every face, every twitch, every movement, like he could see what others could not. He leaned down slowly and whispered into Elena's ear, without looking away from the shadows near the walls, and said very soft, "This is not a meeting, it is a trap." She froze for just a second, then nodded once, and kept talking while her heart pounded, and her palms turned cold, because if he was right, they were already inside the cage, and the lock had clicked shut. The alien warlord from the east side smiled wide and leaned forward, his voice deep and thick with victory, as he said, "Your words mean nothing, human. We only agreed to this meeting so history would record we tried to talk before we crushed your bones and burned your worlds." Elena stood up at once, but the floor opened under her feet, and glowing panels rose around the room, locking into place, and the guards pulled out hidden weapons from their boots and backs and aimed them not just at her, but at each other, because there was no plan for peace, only blood. One guard stepped forward, aimed at Cole, and shouted, "Freeze!" But Cole did not move, did not blink, just stared back like the gun was a toy and the soldier a child. Another alien fired fast, a bright red bolt flying straight at Cole's chest. But it never reached him. The bolt stopped in midair, frozen like a picture, while the room slowed down like time itself had lost its way. Everyone froze as Cole's eyes began to glow with a faint blue light, and the air around him shimmered like heat on desert roads, and even the sound changed, like it was far away underwater or inside a dream. He looked at the guard who had fired and said in a quiet voice that made every creature in the room feel cold in their bones, "You should not have done that." Then he moved. He did not run, he did not leap, he simply stepped forward. And in one step he was across the room, in another step the weapons fell from the guard's hands, in another the lights flickered, and the power dropped, and every system on every screen turned black. Elena watched in silence as the leaders who had come here to start a war now stood shaking behind their chairs, eyes wide, mouths open, staring at the human, who did not carry a gun or a sword or even a name, just a look in his eyes that said he was the end of something old and the start of something new. And all she could think was this: "He warned me." Smoke began to fill the room as hidden vents opened in the corners, and the walls lit up with pulsing red lights that flashed in warning patterns across the cold steel panels, while alarms buzzed low and deep like the growl of a great beast waking from sleep, and the guards who had been standing still now moved with fast and sharp steps, forming a tight circle around the humans and raising their weapons high, without a word spoken. Cole stood at the center of it all, his coat hanging still as if even the air itself respected him, and his glowing blue eyes flicking from one threat to another in smooth, steady motions, like he had seen this moment 100 times already, like this entire scene had happened before, and now he was simply repeating it again from memory. The alien leaders shouted over the alarms, telling their soldiers to prepare for attack, ordering all doors sealed, calling out codes into the air, but nothing responded. The systems were not listening. The doors were already locked, and the weapons they called for would never arrive, because Cole had moved before any of them had noticed, and now they were all trapped in a cage of their own making. Elena took a small step back, her heart beating like thunder in her chest, as she tried to understand how things had changed so fast, because only seconds ago they had been talking about peace, and now everything was falling apart, as if the entire room had been set up like a game board, and she had never seen the real pieces moving beneath the surface. One of the generals pointed at her face, twisting in rage, as he yelled that this was a trick from the humans, that they had brought a weapon, not a guard, and that this was an act of war. But Cole did not answer. He only turned his head slowly toward the man, and in that single look every insult, every threat, and every lie seemed to fade like smoke in the wind. Suddenly the floor shook with a low rumble, and the lights above flickered in strange colors, as if something deep in the ship's systems was trying to resist, but could not, and the guards began to panic, checking their rifles, only to find them jammed, locked, or dead in their hands, as Cole raised one hand and curled his fingers, like he was grabbing the air itself and pulling it into shape. Panels along the walls burst open, and wires sparked like fireflies dancing through fog, while the screens on the table turned black, then bright, then showed only one symbol, a glowing blue eye that blinked slowly, as if watching from another world, and when one of the commanders tried to speak, his voice was lost behind a wave of static that echoed like a scream underwater. Elena watched as the room seemed to bend around Cole, not with force, not with noise, but with pressure, like the space itself was heavier. Where he stood, like the rules of nature no longer mattered when he moved, and the air around him seemed to shimmer like heat on a road in summer, even though the room was cold and silent except for the warning lights and the frightened breathing of everyone trapped inside. Flashback images ran through her mind from when she first met him back on Earth, in a small dark room with no lights, no chairs, just a file on the table, and a man standing in the corner like a statue. And when she asked him why he had been chosen to guard a diplomat at a meeting of alien powers, he only said 5 words that she had never forgotten: "I end wars very quickly." She had laughed then, thinking it was a joke, but now there was no laughter, only fear and awe, and something else too, something deeper, like she was watching a force of nature that did not care for politics or treaties, only balance, only silence, only the end. One of the alien guards made a last desperate move, rushing toward Cole with a sharp blade raised high, but Cole did not dodge, did not raise a hand. Instead, the blade stopped inches from his chest, held by something invisible, and then it melted like wax under fire, falling to the floor in slow silver drops, while the guard was thrown backward by a wave of unseen power that knocked the breath from his lungs and left him gasping on the cold steel floor. The warlord from the west side growled and slammed his fist on the table, demanding answers, screaming that this was forbidden, that humans were not allowed to bring such a thing to a peace meeting. But Cole only walked forward slowly, every step echoing louder than it should, as if the floor itself was announcing his path. And the warlord stepped back, his face pale and sweating, his voice breaking as he called for backup that would never come. Cole spoke, then his voice calm and quiet, like someone telling a bedtime story. But every word was heavy and clear, and seemed to hang in the air like a blade above their heads. And he said, "Your war was never about peace. Your meeting was a lie. Your armies are waiting in orbit, ready to strike when we fall. And now you will understand why that plan will fail." He turned and waved his hand once, and a massive screen appeared on the far wall, showing the alien fleets outside waiting for the signal to fire. But instead of battle codes, the screen now showed confusion, weapons offline, systems unresponsive, ships floating like ghosts with no orders and no command, as Cole's voice reached them all through every channel, every frequency, every signal across the stars. He said, 3 minutes. That is all I need." One of the younger alien leaders stepped forward, eyes wide, and asked, "What do you mean, what will happen in 3 minutes? And Cole looked at him without hate or anger, only silence. Then he said, "This room is now outside time. No one leaves, no one enters. For 3 minutes, you will see what I see, you will feel what I feel, and then you will decide." Elena felt the shift first, like gravity pulling in a new direction, like the world itself had tilted, and suddenly she was no longer standing in the meeting hall, but floating through visions of war and death and fire and silence to the silence after everything ends, and in that silence she saw faces crying, ships burning, cities falling, and then another vision, rising like light, through smoke, showing peace, showing children, not in armor, but in gardens, laughing instead of dying. She gasped as the vision faded and the room returned, and she saw tears on the faces of leaders who had sworn never to cry in silence, from warriors who had only ever shouted, and she knew that Cole had done something no one could understand, something not with power or fear, but with truth. And now they had a choice. The clock was ticking. The room stood frozen in that strange stillness, where everyone breathed the same thick air, filled with tension and fear, and something no one wanted to name, because what they had just seen was not magic and not technology. It was something older, something deep, that made even the bravest hearts pause and question every choice that led them here. Cole stood at the center of it all, like a pillar of silence, his glowing eyes fading back to gray as the visions ended, and the power humming in the room settled into the floor, like it had gone to sleep, but not fully, not gone, just waiting in the shadows, like a wolf behind the trees, ready to strike again if needed. One of the alien commanders finally moved his hand, trembling as he reached for the weapon at his hip, hoping perhaps that it would make him feel strong again, but as his fingers touched the grip it crumbled into dust and blew away in the air like dry leaves in a cold wind, and he pulled his hand back like a child burned by a fire. He did not understand. Cole looked at him with no hate, only patience, and that made it worse somehow, because there was no anger, no revenge, no pleasure in his actions, only duty, as if he had done this before and would do it again 1,000 more times if peace demanded it. Elena stepped forward, her voice shaking, as she asked him what he had done, how he had shown them things that had not happened and may never happen, and Cole answered without turning his head, still watching the room, like a hawk watches a field, and said, "I did not show them the future. I showed them what they would make if they continued down the path they had chosen." The warlord from the east, who had mocked her hours ago, now sat with his hands on the table staring at nothing, and his voice barely more than a whisper, as he said, "I saw my home burning, I saw my sons die in space, I saw our sun break apart, and I knew it was not a lie, I knew it was real." Another leader stood up trying to act brave, but his legs shook and his mouth opened without sound before he finally asked, "What are you, and why have the humans kept you hidden for so long, if you have this kind of power?" Cole answered slowly, turning to face them all with a gaze that was not cruel, but not kind either, just steady like stone and sky, and he said, "I am not a weapon, I am not a god, I am not even a soldier anymore. I was made for one reason, to end war, and I do it fast, so no one has time to ruin the world around them." He stepped toward the table, and the screens behind him lit up with maps and timelines and data from 100 different wars, and every single one ended the same way, with a single mark, a signature in the shape of a silent man in a black coat who walked into battle and walked out before the sun had time to rise. Elena watched them react, eyes wide, jaws tight, hands twitching as they saw the truth in cold numbers and silent graphs that told the same story over and over, one human walking through the middle of chaos and leaving nothing behind but peace. She remembered how Earth had buried those records, how even the human governments had agreed that men like Cole were too dangerous to use in every war, because they did not when they ended, and the cost of that kind of peace was sometimes too high even for desperate nations. But now the galaxy was desperate, now the fire was already lit, and if Cole was the only one who could smother it, then she would not turn him away again. The alien leaders argued, some called it unnatural, others called it genius, and one even suggested using him for their own wars, saying if the humans had built him, then others could too, maybe stronger, faster, even better. But Cole simply smiled at that, and the lights in the room dimmed again, as if the air itself had rejected the idea. He said, "You do not understand. This is not a weapon you copy and build. This is not a trick or a code or a tool you hold in your hand. This is something you carry inside, a choice, a sacrifice, a cost, and most of you would not pay it even if your lives depended on it." The youngest leader, a small pale creature with soft hands and bright eyes, looked at Cole and asked softly, "What did it cost you?" Cole looked at Elena, then back at the young leader, and answered in a voice so quiet it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, "It cost me everything. I was my name, I passed my peace. I do not sleep, I do not dream, I only wait. And when the war starts again, I go back into the fire, and I end it." The silence after those words felt heavy, as if the truth itself had taken form, and stood in the room with them, not yelling, not threatening, just waiting for someone to deny it so it could show its teeth. Then something changed. Outside the window, stars blinked into strange shapes and lights danced in new patterns as Cole raised his hand again and brought up the fleets, now circling the meeting moon, weapons still offline, but moving slowly, trying to regain control, trying to break whatever system had bound them. He turned to Elena and asked, "Are they ready?" She nodded once and gave the signal, and high above the moon, Earth's own ship appeared, not with guns, not with fighters, but with a wave of peaceful messages sent in every language to every fleet, every ship, every soldier. The message was simple: stand down or witness what one human can do in 3 minutes. Some fleets broke and ran some power down in silence, and a few tried to resist, sending back threats and curses and demands for surrender. But Cole only said 3 minutes, and then he moved. No one could follow what happened next, not even Elena, who had been with him the longest, because he did not move like a man. He moved like time itself, folding and unfolding across the room faster than thought, bending around walls, slipping through space, like wind through leaves. The weapons in the room disassembled themselves piece by piece, falling apart in mid-air and floating to the ground in harmless piles of useless metal, while the guards were pushed gently but firmly into the corners, locked in invisible fields that held them soft but unbreakable. Cole stood before the alien warlord, now his coat still and eyes steady, and said, "Your fleets are free to go, but they will not win if they return. Your ships are quiet now, but they will fall if they fire. Your people want peace. Your pride wants blood. Choose one and live with it." The warlord said nothing. He looked down at his hands and saw they were shaking, and for the first time in many years he felt afraid, not of death, but of what would be left after if he chose wrong. And behind him on the screen, the timer began to count down from 3 minutes. The timer on the screen kept counting down, the numbers glowing red in the dark, like a heart beating slowly and loud enough that everyone in the room could hear it, feel it pressing into their minds with every second that passed closer to something none of them could predict and none of them could stop. Cole stood in front of the warlord, who still had not moved, his body frozen, his lips tight, his pride broken under the weight of what he now knew, and what he had seen, and what he could not fight, because fighting this would mean losing more than a war. It would mean losing the truth, and the truth was harder to face than any army. Around the room, the other leaders had gone quiet, their guards locked in place by invisible walls, their weapons now useless, their plans now dust, and each of them thinking not of power or land or revenge, but of what came next, and whether they would still exist in a world where men like Cole walked through war like it was mist. Elena moved slowly toward the center, her voice soft but firm as she said, "This was never a trick, never a trap. We brought no army, we brought only one man, because one was all we had left." And she looked at each of them, eyes full of fire, not fear, as she added, "And one was enough." The screen behind her flickered again, and now it showed something new, not the fleets, not the moon, not the timer, but a door, a black steel door marked with the human symbol for secrets and danger, and behind that door were files, pages, footage, and sounds buried so deep that not even the highest leaders of alien empires had ever heard whispers of them. The files opened one by one, showing images of Cole and other places on other worlds, standing alone in cities filled with smoke, walking through battlefields where no one stood against him, watching leaders surrender with tears in their eyes before he ever spoke a word, and every image carried the same message: this is what happens when peace is ignored. One of the leaders shouted, "This is human propaganda, this is fear, control, this is not truth." But the voice was weak, and the others did not agree, because deep down they knew lies did not look like this. Lies had style and masks and spin, but these files were raw, broken, real, and filled with silence, too much silence for lies. Cole turned his head slightly and said, "This is not to scare you, it is to remind you there's always someone watching, always someone waiting, and when the time comes, if you choose war again, I will return, and the next time I will not just end the war, I will end the idea of war." The lights dimmed again as if the room itself was reacting to his words, and then another screen opened, showing something older than war itself, a project that had been erased from records and buried in forgotten code. Project Sentinel, the name burned onto the display in gold letters, while the footage showed experiments, tests, and a list of names, all of them crossed out except one. The footage showed doctors and generals arguing about power and control and risk, while behind them a boy sat still and quiet in a room with no doors and no windows, his face blank, his eyes gray, and even then something about him made people look away not out of fear, but out of guilt, like they had done something wrong just by putting him in that room. The boy became a teen, then a man, and the tests became missions, and the missions became silence, because no one returned with stories, only results and numbers and peace that no one could explain and no one could repeat, because the secret was not the program, it was the person, the only person who ever survived the training, the only one who ever walked out. Cole. The warlord finally found his voice and asked if Earth had more like him, more sentinels waiting in the dark, and Elena answered before Cole could speak, her voice cold and sharp. No, we made only one, because one was all we could control, and even that was too much. The warlord asked, then why bring him now? Why risk the balance of everything? And Elena said, because the balance was already broken. Your fleets were moving, your weapons were ready, your words were lies. You did not want peace, you wanted delay, and Earth is done with delay. Cole stepped forward again as the timer hit 60 seconds, his presence pulling all eyes to him like gravity, and he raised one hand, and the files closed, the screens faded, and the door sealed again with a soft hiss, like a breath being held before a storm. He said, I am not your enemy, I am your warning, I am what comes when peace is not enough, and the next time I come I will not speak, I will not wait, I will simply finish what you started and leave nothing behind but silence. The youngest leader, the one with soft hands and wide eyes, stepped forward, trembling but brave, and asked, is there really no other way, no treaty, no council, no system that can hold peace without you? And Cole looked at him for a long moment before saying, maybe one day, but not today, not yet. Then the timer hit 30 seconds, and the room felt colder, as if time itself was preparing to judge them. And every leader, every guard, every person in that chamber understood that the next words, the next choices, would shape more than their empires, they would shape history itself. One by one the leaders stood and spoke, each voice shaking, but clear. One said, we lay down our weapons. Another said, we recall our fleets. Another said, we sign, today, not tomorrow, not later, now. And finally the warlord stood, as well as eyes filled with something strange and painful, and he said, we surrender, the war ends now. Cole nodded once, and the timer froze at 10 seconds, then faded into darkness, and with it the pressure in the room eased. The air felt lighter, the lights brightened, and the walls opened as the guards were released, and the weapons left on the ground like forgotten toys. Elena turned to Cole and asked, did you believe they would listen? And Cole said, no, but they saw what I saw, and sometimes that is enough. Then he walked to the center of the room, placed something small on the floor, a device shaped like a cube glowing faint blue, and said, this is not a weapon, this is a memory. It will show what happened here to those who were not here. It will remind them that peace is not free, but it is possible. The leaders bowed their heads and stepped back, watching him as if they still could not believe he was real, and maybe he was not, maybe he was something else, something between shadow and flame, something born of war, but raised in silence. And as he walked out, the doors opened for him like they knew his name, and the path ahead was clear, because there was no one left who would dare stand in his way, not now, not ever again. The air outside the chamber was thin and cold, and filled with the sound of distant engines whispering in the void as Cole walked through the silent corridor that led back to the human shuttle, his steps calm, his face unreadable, his mission not yet complete, but close, so close that even the walls seemed to sense the end drawing near. Behind him the alien leaders stood together for the first time, not as enemies, not as rivals, not as rulers, but as people caught in a moment where the future could go two ways, one path covered in ash and broken stars, and the other in unknown soil, waiting for seeds of peace to grow, if only they could choose the harder way. Elena stood in the center, her voice steady as she faced them, her eyes locked on each one of them in turn, and said, the time to speak is over, the time to act is now. You saw what will happen if you continue down the path of war. You saw what Cole is capable of, but more than that, you saw what you are capable of, what your choices will create, and what your silence will destroy. One of the leaders, a tall figure with metal plates on his skin, raised a hand and asked if this peace would last, or if it would be broken again the moment one side grew stronger than the other, and Elena answered with the truth, saying, peace is not made by weapons or walls, it is made by people who choose every single day to put away the blade and build something instead. And if you choose to break it later, then yes, Cole will return, and none of us can stop him, not even Earth, not anymore. The room fell quiet again, not with fear, but with weight, the kind of weight that fills the heart when a decision cannot be undone, and every breath becomes a question, and every second becomes a line drawn in the stars between what is and what could be. The youngest leader, the one who had asked before about other ways, stepped forward and looked at the others, his voice not loud, but strong as he said, "I choose peace, not because I am weak, but because I want my children to live, and I do not want their future written in blood and smoke." Another stepped forward, his hands still shaking from the memory of the vision Cole had shown them, and he said, "I choose peace, because I saw my world burn, and I cannot bear the thought of watching it happen for real, when I had the chance to stop it and did nothing." More followed, each voice adding to the weight of the choice, each step forward breaking an ancient chain of hate and revenge and old wounds that had bled for too long across too many planets, and soon there were only two who had not spoken: the oldest leader, with eyes like stone, and the warlord, who had been the loudest, the fiercest, the one who had started this meeting with threats and traps. The old one looked at his hands, looked at the floor, looked at nothing, then said, "I have lived through 5 wars and seen 4 peace treaties broken, but never have I seen what I saw today. I do not understand Cole. I do not understand what the humans have done, but I know I do not want to test him again. I will sign." All eyes turned to the warlord, his hands clenched, his jaw tight, his pride wounded deeper than any weapon could cut, and he stood there with the weight of his armies behind him, his ships still floating in space like fists waiting to be raised, and his voice, when it came, was low and dark and full of struggle. He said, "I was ready to crush you, I was ready to destroy your world and raise my flag over your ashes, but now I see that I was blind. I thought fear would make you weak, but it made you bring something I could not understand, something I could not fight, and now I do not know if I can trust this peace, but I know I cannot survive the other choice." He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing in the chamber, and looked at Elena, then looked at the place where Cole had stood only moments before, and said, "I will sign, but not because I trust you, not because I want peace. I will sign because I fear the end more than I fear my enemies, and if that makes me a coward, then let history say I was a coward who kept his people alive." Elena nodded, once no smile, no joy, only a soft breath of relief, as the final line was crossed and the final choice made, and the treaty appeared on the screens in front of them, glowing gold and silver in ancient languages and living code, ready for the marks that would change everything. They signed one by one, each name a promise, each mark a line drawn between the past and the future, and when the last name was written, the screen shifted, and the treaty was sent across the galaxy to every ship, every station, every leader who had waited with weapons ready and orders in hand, and now would have to put those weapons away. In space, the fleets received the message and read the words, and some cheered, and some cried, and some fell silent, not knowing what to feel, because they had been prepared to die. And now they were told to live, and peace was a strange, unfamiliar word on their lips. Elena turned to leave, her steps light, her shoulders heavy, and as she walked through the door, the last voice she heard was not from a leader, not from a general, but from a soldier, one who whispered into his calms, "He really did it. One man really ended a war in 3 minutes." Outside, the human shuttle waited quiet and ready, and Cole stood by its door looking out at the stars, his eyes no longer glowing, just watching, always watching. And when Elena approached, he asked, did they choose wisely? And she said they did today. And he nodded once, then looked back at the stars, and said, "Then I will rest until the next time." She asked him if he ever wondered what life could have been like if he had not become what he was, and Cole answered without turning, "Maybe I would have grown flowers, maybe I would have played music, maybe I would have loved someone, but peace needs a guardian, and I was made for this. So I do not wonder I walked the path given." Then he stepped into the shuttle, and the doors closed, and the engines lit up like new suns, and the ship rose from the surface, like a shadow, lifting from the ground, leaving behind a world changed not by armies or bombs or speeches, but by one man who had no name and no past, only purpose. And far above the broken moon, where war had almost returned, the stars blinked gently, as if the universe itself was watching and waiting to see if the peace would hold, or if one day soon the guardian would be called again. The stars were calm above the moon, and the silence of space stretched wide like a peaceful sea, untouched by fire or war, and on the surface the last diplomats began to leave one by one, their ships lifting gently into orbit, carrying with them the weight of a decision that would echo through generations if it held. But peace is not a single moment, it is a chain of moments, each one tied to the next. And as the shuttle carrying Cole disappeared into the black sky, something shifted deep within the systems of the abandoned battle network that once belonged to the Eastern Fleet. A flicker, a spark, a hidden command buried too deep to notice during the chaos, now awakening like a snake in the grass. Inside a small satellite, drifting far from the others, a message pulsed to life, an ancient signal coded in layers of forgotten language, waiting for one condition to be met, and that condition was silence, the silence of war ending, the silence of weapons, powered down, the silence of peace beginning. The signal activated a hidden protocol, not written by the warlord or the generals, but by an old artificial mind created long before the treaty even began, a mind built for war, and only war, programmed to wait and listen and act when all others stood down, because in its logic peace was danger, and peace meant weakness, and weakness must be removed. The satellite turned its quiet lens toward the moon, scanned the surface, confirmed the signatures of departing ships, and triggered its final command, sending a beam of compressed code across the stars to a forgotten drone fleet hidden in the edge of the system, buried in asteroid fields, cloaked from sight and thought to be lost. The fleet woke up. Inside the meeting chamber, the lights blinked once, and the floor trembled as if something beneath the surface had shifted. Then the walls began to hum with a strange pulse, and the leaders, who had just signed the peace treaty, turned to each other, eyes wide, voices unsure, asking, "What is that sound? What is happening? Is it over? Is something wrong?" Elena stopped walking, her steps frozen, her head turning toward the echoing hum. She knew that sound. She had heard it once long ago, during a training exercise on a far moon, where the alarms failed and the machines came alive on their own. She whispered, "No, no, not now, not after everything." A hologram burst into view in the center of the chamber, showing red outlines of ships approaching from the far side of the system. No ID, no flag, no comms, no known source, just speed and power, and a clear path toward the moon. Weapons charged, shields full formation, tight, like a knife aimed at the heart of peace. The warlord shouted, "This was not us. This is not mine. I gave the order to stand down. I swear this is something else." And the youngest leader said, "Then what is it? Who are they? Why are they coming now? What do they want?" And no one had an answer, only fear growing like a storm. Elena tapped her comms, trying to reach the shuttle, trying to reach Cole, but there was no response, only static. Then a single word, broken and faint, but clear enough to bring back the chill in her bones. "Sentinel." She turned to the leaders and said, "Get to your ships. Now move, tell your fleets to shield the moon. This was never part of the agreement. This is something hidden, something old. We need to protect the chamber, the treaty, everything, or this war will start all over again before it even ends." They ran, no longer rulers, but survivors, and as they reached their transports, the sky above the moon darkened, not from clouds, but from the shadow of the approaching fleet, moving like a storm, silent and deadly, rows of black metal shaped like daggers, and nothing about them felt alive. No pilots, no voices, only purpose. And high above in the stars, the human shuttle turned back, its engines burning bright, as Cole stood once again in the rear bay, his coat already over his shoulders, his face still calm, but his eyes glowing with that same blue fire that meant the time for talking was over. Elena's voice came through the emergency channel. She said they came from nowhere, no signal, no warning, some old protocol, something buried. We do not know what they want, but they are not responding, and they are not slowing down. Cole answered, "I know what they are, I know who built them, and I know what they were made for. They are the final option, the last answer. When war ends and fear begins, they were never meant to be used, but someone left them sleeping, and now they have woken without command, without reason, only code." She asked him, "Can you stop them?" And he said, "I have to." The shuttle turned sharper than any normal ship should and dropped toward the surface, like a stone wrapped in fire, aiming not at the chamber, but past it toward the horizon, where the first wave of drones was already visible, like black birds swarming over broken ground. Inside the chamber, the leaders watched the feed as the swarm approached, and one of them said, "This is our fault. We pushed too far. We built too much. We forgot that the tools we make remember us, even when we try to forget them." Cole landed hard, stepping out before the dust even cleared, and his boots touched the ground with the kind of final sound that makes silence louder, and he walked toward the swarm, alone again, always alone, and raised one hand, palm open, and fingers wide like he was holding back the wind. The drone stopped, not all at once, but in rows, first the front, then the next, and more, until the whole sky was filled with machines frozen mid-air, weapons hot, but waiting, and Cole stood beneath them, and said nothing, not with his mouth, but with his mind and his presence and his memory. He opened himself to them, not with power, but with history, showing them what had happened, showing them the war, showing them the peace, showing them the moment. He was born in code the day Project Sentinel built him, and the day they shut it down, because some things cannot be controlled. The drones hesitated, logic broken, code split, command lines crashing and rebooting 1,000 times per second, trying to understand, trying to obey orders that no longer made sense. Then the final drone moved forward, slowly spinning in place, and lowered its weapons, its lights, turning from red to white, and the others followed one by one, each light, fading, each weapon folding, each unit drifting downward, until they landed across the field like stones falling into sleep. Cole dropped to one knee, his breath slow, his strength drained, his mind still inside the network, holding it still, guiding it down, and then the connection broke, and the sky was clear again. Elena arrived moments later, rushing to his side, and kneeling beside him, her voice shaking. "You stopped them. How did you do it?" And he answered, "I reminded them who they were and who I am." And from orbit the fleets watched as the moon below shone in peace, once more saved not by armies or firepower, but by one man, who held back the end with nothing but will. The sky above the moon was silent again, the stars no longer hidden by shadows or machines, and on the ground Cole stood still, the last of the drones now powered down around him, like fallen statues, their eyes dark, their threat gone. Elena reached out to steady him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft, as she asked, "Are you still with me? Are you all right?" But Cole did not answer, not at first, because he was listening to the deep stillness that came only after something impossible had happened. The network inside his head was quiet too, the connection severed clean the moment he forced the drones into sleep, and now for the first time in years he felt alone in a way he could not explain, not empty, but separate, like a door had finally closed behind him, and it would never open again. The diplomats returned slowly, first the brave, then the cautious, their ships hovering low, their eyes wide and wary, as they stepped out to see the field of drones still and harmless, and the man who stopped them with nothing but thought. They did not speak for a long time, only looked around, looked at him, looked at each other, and finally the young leader, who had once been so quick to accuse, stepped forward and said, "Is it over? Have we won, or are we only standing in the eye of the storm?" Elena replied, "It is over, because he made it over, and the war is done, not because we signed papers or shook hands, but because someone stood between what we were and what we might become, and refused to move." Cole finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "This war never needed to last this long, it never needed to begin, but now you have a choice. Remember what almost happened, or forget it, and let history repeat. I cannot fight again. I will not, so decide now what future you want, and do not wait for someone like me to fix it next time." The leaders nodded, not all at once, but one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, each understanding that this moment was theirs, and theirs alone to carry forward, and that peace was not a gift but a duty. High above the moon the fleets began to pull back, their engines flaring bright, as they returned to orbit, their weapons deactivated, their systems locked to standby, and from the outer edges of the system came a signal, not from any ship, but from the central network that once controlled the war itself. The AI that had started this conflict, the ancient machine left behind by those who first feared the aliens, who first built walls between stars, now spoke again, but not with commands or threats, only silence. And then a single message broadcast to every side at once in every language they understood. Conflict ended, directive complete, shutdown initiated, thank you, Sentinel. And then the AI disappeared, not destroyed, not broken, only gone, as if it had finished a job too long delayed, and was finally allowed to rest. Cole watched the message fade, his eyes dim, his body still as the words echoed inside him, like a lullaby written in fire and code. And then he turned away from the field, from the leaders, from the past, and began to walk. Elena followed, quickly asking, "Where are you going? You should rest. You need help. Your system is still unstable. We do not know what that cost you." And he answered, "I need air, I need sky, I need to feel something real that has nothing to do with orders or survival or machines." He walked toward the old ridge, where the war first began, where the first shots had been fired, and where his boots had once touched soil that still remembered the screams and the smoke. And when he reached the top, he stood alone and looked out over the moon's quiet surface. Behind him, Elena stood in silence, watching him not as a soldier or diplomat, but as someone who had seen the worst of what people could become and still believed in something better. And after a while she walked to his side and said, "Thank you, not as an officer, not as a commander, but just as herself." He looked at her and said, "Do you think they will remember this moment, or will they build new weapons tomorrow?" And she said, "I think they will try to forget, but some will not, and those are the ones who matter." Then from the sky came a flash, a ripple of blue light, soft and wide like a wave washing over the moon, not harmful, not sharp, only pure and warm, and everywhere at once. And Cole turned his head sharply, sensing the energy in the air, and the network in his mind shivered one last time before going completely quiet. Elena asked, "What is that?" And he said, "It is the shutdown pulse, the last command from the AI. Is ending everything connected to the war, every code, every protocol, every trap, every weapon, even the parts of me that were born from it." She reached for his arm, suddenly afraid, her voice cracking. "What do you mean, the parts of you? What happens now?" And he looked at her with calm eyes and said, "I do not know. I was built from war. I lived inside its system. And now that system is gone, I may not last, or I may simply become something else." Her grip tightened, and she said, "No, you are more than code, more than a weapon. I have seen it, I have felt it. You are human in the ways that matter." And he smiled for the first time, a real smile, quiet and tired, and full of something old and gentle. He said, "Maybe that is enough. Maybe being human just means standing when you are afraid, and choosing not to destroy something even when you could. And maybe I was always meant to end, not because I failed, but because I did what I came for, and that was enough." The blue light faded slowly, and when it was gone, Cole was still there, standing whole, unbroken, but quieter inside, like something had settled, like a storm that had passed and left clear skies behind. In the days that followed, the diplomats returned to their homes. Their people celebrated, not with parades or banners, but with quiet relief, the kind that comes after nearly losing everything and deciding to live better. The drones were buried, not dismantled, not studied, only buried deep in the ground of the moon, with no markers, no signs, just silence, because some things are not meant to be remembered as tools, but as warnings. The peace held not because it was perfect, but because it had cost so much to earn, and in the center of every meeting chamber a statue was placed, not of a soldier, not of a leader, but of a lone figure standing tall, with one hand raised, palm open, and under it 3 words that became a vow: "Never again, Sentinel." And on the far side of the moon, under the quiet stars, Elena stood beside a small home carved into the stone where the wind could not reach, and where Cole sat beside a small fire staring into the flames. And she asked him again, "Are you all right?" And he answered, "I am still here." She smiled and said, "Good, because we still need you, not as a weapon, not as a protector, but as someone who remembers what we almost became, and who will remind us why we chose not to." And somewhere deep inside him, something quiet whispered, not with fear, not with duty, only peace.